Welcome back. Today we're looking at Dante's Paradiso again, and we're looking at the planet Mars. And so we come to Canto 16, in which Dante is going to open with the idea of family pride. And this is kind of an important concept that we've seen throughout the Divine Comedy, right? There was a big emphasis on this when we saw Farinata in the Inferno. And you can go back and look back at our notes over that, or reread that section to see that again. Farinata was very, very interested in family pride, and in bragging whose family was better, his or Dante's. And here Dante has just seen someone who is from his family, who he's very proud of. And he says, "O insignificant nobility of blood, if you make us glory in you here below, where our affections are ephemeral, I will not ever think it strange, for there, where appetite is never warped, in, I mean the heavens themselves, I gloried in you too." So Dante seems to be sort of falling into a pit that should have already grown out of, and that is family pride. He's seen the dangers of what happens when you pursue family pride and glory in things that are not divine, but he's going to modify this just a little bit in the next tercet. "You are indeed a cloak that quickly shrinks, so that if we do not add to it day by day, time trims the edges with its shears." So family pride is a cloak that quickly shrinks. It stops fitting pretty quickly. As soon as you put it on and think that it's what's going to bring you glory, oh, my family's so much better than yours, pretty quickly it's no longer fitting very well, unless you are adding to it. And I've seen multiple interpretations of this idea, some of them positive and some of them negative. Hollander seems to think that Dante's generally messing up here. But Cook and Hersman have a different idea. They point out that, sure, family pride is dangerous and damaging, perhaps, unless you are strengthened by the example of the nobility of your ancestors. As you look back at their nobility and you embrace that nobility, so you see the faith and the strength and the courage of your fathers, and you use that to grow and to develop and to become a stronger, better person. In that case, sure, family pride is something that is useful to you. But when you just lean yourself on family pride without looking to your own actions, that's when you mess up. There's a big difference between the living pride here, which is more of a eagerness to embrace the example of the past, than it is the dead pride that we saw of Farinata standing in his own tomb. Dante begins to speak, and Beatrice does seem to sort of give him a little kind of face, maybe telling him to be careful as he walks this fine line with family pride, especially as the first word that Dante uses is a very formal you, which he's only used a few times so far. He saves it for special people, and so here he is using it to address his great-great-grandfather, which seems appropriate, but also we recognize and create a link with the people that Dante has seen as most important. He used it twice in the Inferno. Interestingly, with Farinata and with Brunetto Latini, two people who seem to clearly have connections with this section. Farinata, as we've just mentioned, and also Brunetto as a failed father figure. Brunetto wanted so much to be that example and that guide for Dante, but he was running in a circle in hell. And Dante chose instead to seek divine will. Now here he finds a true father figure whose example is more admirable, and who can perhaps finally give him that guidance that he's been looking for, and that understanding. Brunetto is also one of the people who prophesied to Dante in hell. And we've talked about those prophecies in the past, but here we're going to get Dante's final prophecy, which clears up all of the confusion of the previous ones. Dante's eager to ask lots of questions, and so he asks about Cacciaguida's childhood, he asks about who his family was, his ancestors, he asks about what Florence was like in the past, how big it was, what the population was like, and he asks who the cool and famous people were in Cacciaguida's day. And Cacciaguida glows more brightly to be able to answer Dante's questions, and then he slips into another form of Italian, an older Italian. So Dante here this is the year 1300 for Dante. Cacciaguida was living in 1125 1150, and so his language slips back a couple hundred years, or 150 years, to an older way of speaking. This is the third time that Cacciaguida has changed his language. Cacciaguida mentions briefly where his ancestors came from, but doesn't talk about them much. He says, my ancestors and I were born just where the horsemen of your yearly race first come from the farthest district. Let that be enough for you about my forebears. As to who they were and where they came from, it is more modest to be silent than to speak. And so maybe this is another check on that whole family pride concept. And then for most of the rest of this particular canto, Cacciaguida is going to talk about, one, how much the population has exploded in Florence between then and now, and how that huge influx of people from all different places has mostly brought bad influences into Florence. But also he's going to list some of the great old families who have become forgotten. And there's a sense of good things being lost and things being forgotten as people move into more and more disparate and more disunified ways of living. And ultimately, this list and discussion culminates in talking about a story of one particular man whose name is Buondelmonte. And it's his bad love story that ultimately is cited as the origin of the conflict between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. And as we know, that's the center of the problems in Florence. This huge conflict that led to more conflict that ultimately led to division and civil war and destruction. Now, Buondelmonte was engaged to a young woman, but then he got a better offer, and so he ditched her for someone else, and so her family comes and murders him. And so we see a lot of the themes that we saw in Inferno, of course, that sort of family vendetta thing going on there, family pride, we've got division and schisms and things like that. And it's funny because Cacciaguida calls out Buondelmonte, who was the sort of origin of the Guelph party, which becomes Dante's party. It's not the leader of the Ghibellines that Cacciaguida is calling out so much, as it's Dante's own party head. And he describes the scene where Buondelmonte is murdered and he's lying, dying, at the base of a statue of Mars, god of war. And again, we see that contrast between the idea of courage to do what's right and to stand against wrong, which is definitely not Buondelmonte, and that violence and that war and that bloodshed that are symbolized by the traditional symbol of Mars. Buondelmonte is no martyr. And so we come at last to Canto 17, which is not the last canto with Mars in it, but it's the last full canto with Mars. We'll finish Mars out and move on to Jupiter next time. And Dante opens this canto speaking as Phaeton did. Now, Phaeton was the son of Apollo, and when at one moment he had heard a rumor of his parentage, and so he goes to investigate and find out who his father was. Is my father really Apollo? And ultimately, this quest to find his father led him to drive the chariot of the sun, which he did very badly, and he wound up dead. But there's that need to know, that need to understand, which is where Dante's really finding that link. But there's also that connection to the idea of understanding our fathers and where we come from. And he says, such was I, and such was I perceived to be, both by Beatrice and by the holy light that earlier for me had changed its place. So he has something inside of him, some burning need to know something. But as before, usually the souls around here can see Dante's thoughts before he even really forms them, and so they're able to answer his questions without Dante talking. But again, Dante is called upon to ask his question. And this time, for a slightly different reason. If the first time was because it brought Cacciaguida joy to hear the voice of his descendant, this time it's because sometimes you just have to say something in order to fully think it. So my lady said to me, send forth the flame of your desire, and let it issue with the clear imprint of its inner stamp. Not that our knowledge may be increased by what you say, but that you rehearse the telling of your thirst, so that the drink be poured for you. That idea of rehearse the telling of your thirst. Sometimes as you're working through your desires and your thoughts and trying to feel exactly what it is that you want to say, you have to actually say it before it makes complete sense, or before you truly understand for yourself what it is that you're asking. And so Dante again asks this question aloud. "O my precious root, you who are raised so high that even as earthly minds discern no triangle can contain two angles, both of them obtuse, so you, gazing on the point that hold all time, are able to discern contingencies before they are apparent in themselves. While I was still in Virgil's company, both on that mountain that restores our souls and during our descent into the region of the dead, grave words were said to me about my future life. However much I feel myself prepared foursquare against the blows of chance, so that my will would be content if I could know what fate draws near, for the arrow one expects comes slower." Dante draws sort of a parallel between mortal reasoning and divine understanding. So mortal reasoning sees geometry and says, okay, here's a triangle, it can't have two obtuse angles because that doesn't make sense. Therefore, it's a clearly defined and definable fact. Whereas Cacciaguida is sitting at a different position. Sure, he sees definable facts, but from his divine position, he also sees all future contingencies, all the possibilities of what is going to happen and what could happen. So, in other words, he can tell the future. But there's a big distinction, again, as Cacciaguida points out in just a moment, between the idea of being able to tell the future and making the future happen. So the whole time travel problem, which has been explored a million times in a million different ways, Dante's exploring that here as well. If you know what's coming, does that take your responsibility away from it? And Dante also points out that he's heard prophesy about himself several times, through purgatory, through hell, what is going to happen to him here in just a couple of years. His exile. And if you look back at some of those prophecies, especially some of the early ones, Chaco in hell, Brunetto Latini, Vanni Fuggi, Farinata, some of these guys made these veiled references to Dante's exile. And some of those weren't abundantly clear. And so Dante really can somebody just really lay this out for me finally? And we kind of thought back there in Inferno that it was going to be Beatrice who was doing that. But finally here we see, no, it's actually Dante's great-great-grandfather, Cacciaguida, as the father figure. And so he's sort of fulfilling those roles of those other figures who, Farinata as we saw, Brunetto Latini as we saw, and finally coming through for Dante. Which makes this section a pretty powerful section. And Cacciaguida is finally going to lay it out for him plain. Not with cloudy sayings by which the foolish folk were once ensnared, before the Lamb of God, who takes away our sins, was slain, but in plain words, and with clear speech, that paternal love replied, hidden and yet revealed in his own smile. And the first thing Cacciaguida is going to do is, as I said, point out to Dante that just because you know this beforehand doesn't change free will. These events, as he says, are by that no more enjoined than is a ship, moved downstream on a river's flow by the eyes that mirror it. So as you watch a ship flowing down a stream, you're not making that boat move with your eyes. You just happen to be seeing it move. It doesn't change you. And here we're going to draw in another myth about a parent. Hippolytus, whose stepmother, Phaedra, was really awful because, well, you should go read about Phaedra. There's a great play. But she got him killed because she was a bad, wicked stepmother. And so here we started this one with Phaeton, and now we have Hippolytus, these two young men who had conflict because of their parenting. And Dante fills the role of both of these because he is both feeling this connection to his parent, Cacciaguida, but he's also feeling Florence as his parent, his mother. And she's the wicked stepmother who is going to ruin him. And Cacciaguida says, this is the plan, already set in motion, that soon will bring success to him who plots it where Christ is bought and sold all day. Boniface! good old Boniface VIII who's going to ruin you, Dante, and you're going to be driven out of Florence. That's just how it is. And he goes on to say, the populace shall blame the injured party, as it always does. But vengeance shall bear witness to the truth that metes it out. So, as usual, history goes to the winners. Unless the loser is the greatest poet of all time. Take that, Boniface! So Dante is the loser here, and he's written off as the loser, and everybody is going to side with the winners, because that's just how these things work. But Dante has a chance for redemption, and to redeem his name in all of this. And that is, he gets a chance to retell the whole history for us. And now everyone, those way on down the road, us, hear the story from Dante's point of view, not from the winner's point of view. And Cacciaguida goes on to describe Dante's exile and the pain that he's going to feel. You shall leave behind all you most dearly love, and that shall be the arrow first loosed from the exile's bow. You shall learn how salt is the taste of another man's bread, and how hard is the way going up and down another man's stairs. Exile's going to be painful, Dante, and you're gonna have to learn how to bear it. This passage is frequently quoted. It's very potent. Dante is going to have to learn to eat bread with salt in it, because the Florentines don't eat salt in their bread. But also we're reminded of the salt tears that Dante is going to be weeping as he eats foreign bread. He eats bread in all those places except for home. And he's going to have to learn how difficult it is to live off other people, to live in places that are not home to you, and to never have that opportunity to go back home. And Cacciaguida goes on and says, but the heaviest burden your shoulders must bear shall be the companions, wicked and witless, among whom you shall fall in your descent. They, utterly ungrateful, mad, and faithless, shall turn against you. But soon enough they, not you, shall feel their faces blushing past their brows. Of their brutish state the result shall offer proof, and it shall bring you honor to have made a single party of yourself alone. And so we're getting a sort of a revision of idea here. In the section of the Sun, we saw this huge emphasis on unity, on working together. And here Dante is being told that he just needs to work alone? But let's clarify. After Dante's exile, there were several members of Dante's party who wanted to return to Florence and try to take back over. And their plans were generally bad ones and led to disaster. And as Dante at first started getting involved with them, thinking of, okay, we got to get back, we got to turn things around here, we got to, get back control of the city. Pretty quickly, these people who had been previously preaching peace and unity and trying to overcome the bad behavior of the other party that was tearing Florence apart, were doing the same sort of low blows to try to get power back. And Dante became disillusioned with this. And he finds that the people who acted like they cared about Florence and that they had Florence at heart, ultimately, they no longer seem to care about Florence at all, but only about themselves and about their own power. And so Dante is going to throw up his hands. And this line of being a party of one, being a party by yourself, means that Dante will no longer be part of this factionalism. And we've seen that's been the running theme here anyway. Look at Florence. It's been torn apart again and again and again by factionalism, by schisms, by civil war, by all this kind of violence. And Cacciaguida pointed out that, the good old days when things were simple and people just lived together in harmony, that was great. They weren't after greed and wealth and flashiness. They weren't traveling all over the place. They weren't being torn apart by war. And here, this violence, this bloodshed that comes from this factionalism, all that's ruined Florence. So Dante, don't be a part of it anymore. You don't have to be on this side or that side or the other side. You just be yourself now. Be your own man. And then Cacciaguida goes on to prophesy about a particular family that's going to take Dante in and take care of him. In Verona, Dante is going to say with Bartolomeo, And there he's going to meet a very young man named Congrande, who he's going to have high expectations for. And most of the rest of this section is talking about him and how this young man will possibly help to reunite and reunify and stand against the evils of Boniface VIII and his ilk. And Cacciaguida even goes so far as to say some things that Dante's not going to record. You shall bear this written in your memory, but shall not tell of it. And he foretold events that even those who witness them shall not believe. He says things are going to be okay. They're going to work out. You do what you need to do. And Cacciaguida sort of gives him a pat on the back and says, you stick with it. You don't feel envy for those other souls. You do what's right. And even though things are going to be really hard, you've got a hard road ahead of you, you're going to come out okay. But Dante has one more question here, and he has one more thing that's bothering him about all of this. I began like a man in doubt, but one filled with great desire for advice from someone of clear sight, right will, and love. I can see, Father, that time is spurring toward me to deal me such a blow as falls most heavily on one proceeding heedless on his way. Thus it is good I arm myself with forethought, so that if my beloved town is torn from me, I may not lose still others through my songs. Down through the world of endless bitterness, and upward on the mountains, from those lovely peak my lady raised me with her eyes. And after rising through the heavens, light to light, I have learned things that, should I retell them, would discomfort many with their bitter taste. Yet, should I be timid friend to truth, I fear that I shall not live on for those days to whom our times will be the ancient days. Yet should I be a timid friend to truth, I fear that I shall not live on for those to whom our times will be the ancient days. This is the most sort of meta part of this poem, because Dante's going to talk about the poem. Here he is in paradise, standing in front of Cacciaguida. He's hearing about what's going to happen to him, and he's saying, okay, here I have learned all of these things, and I feel like I should write this big poem about all of them. But two problems. One, I'm already going to get in super big trouble. That's coming. There's no stopping that. But if I start talking about all this hard stuff, it's going to be difficult for a lot of people to take. I might burn any other bridges that I have, and then no one will take me in anywhere. And two, I might lose what fame and glory that I could find here. And we're reminded a bit, again, of Brunetto Latini, and there's another word here. He's going to use the word tresor, which is the name of Brunetto's book, which maybe links back to Cacciaguida here in just a moment. But we're reminded of Brunetto, who said, you're going to be exiled, and you're going to, people are going to be envious of you, and they're going to throw you out of town, but you just keep seeking fame and glory, and everything will work out just fine. And Dante was like, maybe I'll get a second opinion? And here is the second opinion. He's saying to Cacciaguida, I'm a little scared to say what I know, to stick to the truth, and to tell people what is true. Should I just try to pursue fame and try to pursue smoothing things over as best I can? Or should I tell everything I've seen and heard on my journey here, even if it burns all my bridges? And Cacciaguida glows brighter, and that's the pattern, right? A conscience dark, whether with its own or with a kinsman's shame, is sure to feel your words are harsh. Nonetheless, forswear all falsehood, revealing all that you have seen. Then let him who itches scratch. For if your voice is bitter at first taste, it will later furnish vital nourishment, once it has been swallowed and digested. Cacciaguida says, you gotta tell it. You gotta tell the truth. That is the most important thing. And we see that continued metaphor of bread. Dante's gonna have to eat the bread of exile, and it's not gonna taste good. It's not mom's good home cooking. But he's also going to be feeding other people with a bitter bread, a bread that doesn't taste good. And that is his poem. There are times when the ideas, the arguments of his poem cut deep, and yet it provides a vital nourishment. The truth that comes from Dante's poem will have a positive effect on the world around him. And he was afraid of being forgotten and lost. And yet, who is it that's still reading his poem hundreds of years later? That's why you've been given this gift, Dante, to share. And it's gonna work out for the best. Dante, still remembered 700 years later because he stuck to the truth and he stuck to saying what he truly believed. That brings us to the end of Canto 17. Next time, we'll wrap up Mars and head on to Jupiter.